Those of you may or may not know some of my work and what I do, but I work with a lot of Jewish organizations. And Jews love talking about Jewish values. Blink and you might miss it, but there's been a really subtle, and you have to pay attention, campaign in Yeshiva University promoting Jewish values. And you gotta squint, you gotta be careful. You'll miss the whole thing. It even scares me when If you walk down the Uptown campus, and I'm sure there's some skyscraper that I can't even see it in Midtown, you'll notice that we have a campaign about 5 core Torah values. And what I want to talk about is not really just the importance of Jewish values, but why signage really only tells half the story. There is a phenomenal thinker named Ben Horowitz who works for a venture capitalist firm called Andreessen Horowitz, who wrote a phenomenal book called What You Do Is Who You Are, How to Create Your Business Culture. And it's a book that is not about values. Dare I say, it's anti-values. And I want to assure everybody in the crowd, I would not be speaking about this tonight had I known in advance that Rabbi Dr. Berman would be here tonight. Not a chance, but he is here. He writes about how values, mission statements, it's not the real story. All of you went to a high school, all of you go to a university that has a mission statement, that has values. And I bet if I took all of those mission statements and all of those values and I mix them together, it would be hard to sort together which mission statement aligns with which institution. So how do you tell the difference between different institutions? How do you tell the difference between different companies? His thesis is that it's all about culture. Culture, in his words, is not like a mission statement. You can't just set it up and have it last forever. There's a saying in the military that if you see something below standard and do nothing, then you've set a new standard. This is also true of culture. If you see something off culture and ignore it, you've created a new culture. Culture is what reinforces your values, and you are creating them constantly. You could write down on a sign what you value, what you hold dear, what mission statements guiding your institution, your high school, your company, for-profit, non-profit. And you could put it on a building, you could put it on a billboard, you could write it on a skyscraper. We've done all of the above. But the only way that you really shape and change a unique institution is through the cultural experience of being part of that institution. There are all sorts of different values that we talk about in the Jewish community. We have the 5 Torot. A round of applause for the 5 Torot. We're not applauding enough for the 5 Torot. We're just not doing that in general. We have the 13 Ikarim of the Rambam. We have Rambam got no applause. No, we don't need to applause after each one. The 5 Torot, the Yud Gimel Ikarim, the 13 principles of the Rambam. We remember Torah Umada, Torah Misinai, the fact that the Torah that we have derives from God in Revelation, Torah in Derech Eretz, the great movement of Reb Shamshon Fal Hirsch. We have excellence, we have kindness, we've mentioned honesty today. There are so many values that we hold dear, that we prop up in our own lives and our own institutions. My question is what is the culture that reinforces your values? What is the culture that reinforces each of these? There's a culture that reinforces the value of revelation and the significance of our Torah. There's a way that we stand up when a Sefer Torah walks out of the Aron Kodesh. There are rules that we have in the way that we don't touch the parchment, the cloth of a Sefer Torah. There is a reverence in which we approach a Sefer Torah. If you don't build culture around your values, then all you have is a sign. And what I would ask each of you in your own life is, what is the culture that reinforces your values? Because without that culture, without that specificity of the ongoing experience of what it's like interacting with a specific institution, a specific person, a specific individual, a specific company, then you're just left with a sign. Ben Horowitz had a conversation with a fabulous podcast host named, not me, hold your applause, Barry Ritholtz. Barry Ritholtz hosts a podcast called Masters in Business. He's a wonderful, wonderful podcast where he talks with business leaders across the spectrum. And he had this conversation. I want to focus on the bold in that second column. And so that begs the question, how do you get people to behave how you want them to behave when you're not there? When you're not in the room, when there's no sign, when there's no written mantra that has your principles of what you value, what you want to be, what you want to become. How do you get a company and an individual to do that? Like all things, your culture, the second column, is not in the mission statement. They're not in the KPIs and the OKRs and all these kind of things. The culture has to be built for a specific strategy. And what I would ask each of you right now is, imagine we didn't have a sign on that massive Reuben dorm on Amsterdam Avenue. And I want you to ask, what were the cultural values that you saw reinforced during your YU experience? If you had to make a list of 5 values that were reinforced constantly in your experience, what were they? What did you feel was promoted and what did you feel was demoted? What was honored and raised and put on a pedestal and what was deliberately pushed down and not valued? Because the way that you create culture is by promoting, and the way that you create culture is by demoting. What you praise, what you give significance to, is what creates the culture, not necessarily what's on the sign. And the most important values are not the ones that are on the side of the building. It's the ones that you can state and recite when there is no sign, when there is no clear guideline. What do people feel like when they interact with you or that institution? There's a difference between values and culture, but they have to work together. Values might ask, what is on the signage? What is written on the mission statement? What is written in the text in the holy books? What is the slogan? But the real questions that reinforce those values all come down to the cultural experience. Experientially, what is it like when you move through this institution? Experientially, what is it like when you interact with this individual? What does it feel like? Who or what gets promoted? Who or what gets demoted? How is the budget allocated? You want to know what a company values? Don't show me their mission statement. Show me what they spend their time and resources on. And I will tell you what they value. What is the experience like? There's a comedian named Pat Regan who's only done a couple sets. And he has this wonderful dialogue where he talks about how he is perceived. He says that he one time went to a therapist's office, and he's a comedian, and the therapist was complimenting him and saying, it's really remarkable that you come into this office to work on your mental health and what you're dealing with, and you take it seriously, and you don't try to make me laugh, you just really come here and open up your heart. And Pat Regan looked at him and he's like, I actually try really freaking hard to make you laugh. That did not help me. Sometimes what we praise and the experience are misaligned. That's when values and culture are misaligned. Very often you meet somebody and their values is, I want to be seen as smart. I want to be seen as kind. I want to be seen as sweet. And you ask people who interact with them and they're like, they're miserable. They're not clever. They're not intelligent. They didn't make me laugh. there's a misalignment between the cultural experience, what it feels like interacting with them, and what they actually value. And I think for strong institutions and individuals, there needs to be an alignment between the values that are written on the signs in the holy books, on the walls, and what the cultural experience of people moving through those institutions need to be like. There is a famous verse in Proverbs that talks about how we evaluate people. Metzaref lakesef v'chur lazahav v'ish lafi mahalalo. We evaluate silver through the crucible, gold through the furnace, and a person is evaluated by their praise. Now, on a simple level, this means, what do they say about them? What's the Yelp reviews? What was YU like? What was the experience like? And that's the cultural reinforcement component of this. What is it experientially like interacting with this individual? But there is another component, and that is the interpretation of Rabbeinu Yonah, who says that a person is evaluated based on their praise. Does not mean what others say about them, but what they praise, what they highlight, what they value. And I think both of these explanations are correct and highlight the importance of an alignment between what you value, what are on your personal signs, what are on your institutional signs, what are on your organizational signs, and what it actually feels like when people interact with you. And I would ask all of you not just to ask a question about Yeshiva University, but ask it about yourselves. I know what you value. We think about that a lot. But ask yourself for a moment, what is it like, what is the experience like interacting with you, with the people in this room? When people walk away from an interaction with you, does it feel dismissive? Does it feel warm? Does it feel aspirational? Does it feel challenging? Everybody has values, but the way that we preserve and reinforce those values is through the cultural experience. And those are the two ways that we look at how we evaluate an individual and how we evaluate an institution. Ish lafi mahalalo, a person, an individual, it is based on what others say about them, the cultural experience, but also lafi mashahu mihalel, what that person praises. And I think in our lives, when we think about Jewish values in action, when we think about how we represent Jewish values, it's not just enough to have signs, to have 5 Torot, to have Yud Gimel Ikarim, to have principles, to have values. We need to make sure that the cultural experience of when people interact with us, when people move through our institution, those values that we hold most dear are reinforced for an uplifting experience.